The Carolina Hurricanes have made some very good trades over the past 25 seasons. In this episode of Locked On Hurricanes, we'll be looking at the best of them.
You're Locked On Hurricanes, your daily podcast on the Carolina Hurricanes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, Caniacs. I'm your host, Jared Ellis, and you're listening to Locked On Hurricanes on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Hurricanes your first listen of this Monday afternoon. And I am joined by my co-host, as I am all the time, Andrew Schnittker. How you doing on this Monday afternoon, Andrew?
I'm doing great. Ready to talk some Hurricanes trade history. Perhaps soon we will have some to compare to this list because I have the feeling with the draft a week from Friday, it is pretty likely the Hurricanes will make at least one trade within the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like we could definitely be seeing some Hurricanes trades here over the next couple weeks and then obviously into the offseason. But we're going to start with obviously the best one in franchise history, and that is sending Keith Primeau up to Philly for Rod Brind'amour. Obviously, there are some other assets in that trade, but this is the one that everyone talks about. Keith obviously, missed the majority of the season, due to contract holdout. So the Hurricanes just decided to move on from him, and they brought in Rod Brind'amour, who has played a extremely vital part in just the history of the franchise. He obviously, helped stabilize the team, get him to that first Stanley Cup final back in 2002, where they lost to the Detroit Red Wings. Then captained the team for, I believe, 6 seasons, and obviously key piece in them winning the 2006 Cup. Then after he retired, moved into front office. I believe it was head of forward development. I forget the official title, but I know that's what he was doing there. And then obviously assistant coaching, and then now head coaching, playing a key piece in the Hurricanes, coming back to prominence. We've said many times over the course of this show that you don't have the Hurricanes without Rod Brind'amour. He is, when they made that trade back in 2000, who could have thought, here in 2023, he is still a part of this organization. And that is a trade that is still paying off to this day, because if they don't make that trade, they don't have their head of forward development. They don't have their assistant coach. They don't have their head coach. And, again, he would hate it. We've talked about it before, but if anyone's getting a statue up front, it's Rod Brind'amour.
Yeah, I think this is certainly the most impactful trade in franchise history. There's no question about that. For everything you just mentioned, everything he brought, helping in the Hurricanes, first rise to relevance, helping lead them to that 2002 Stanley Cup final. That was really the true, I think, arrival of hockey in this market. Obviously, captaining them to the Stanley Cup, winning, I think, 2 Selke trophies with the Hurricanes,
back-to-back.
Played the majority of what should be by now a Hall of Fame career with the Hurricanes. And then, like you said, if he's not here, he doesn't put down his roots in Raleigh, spend all that time here, then they don't end up with him as the head coach who's, led them out of the dark ages and back into national relevance as a consistent playoff team and cup contender. So, yeah, I mean, Primeau was a good player.
Yeah.
He had a couple good seasons. Well, really, actually, other than that first full season with the Flyers, he did not have nearly as much of an impact as Brind'amour. And then I think he retired from the NHL after the 05-06 season.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, there's no question. Obviously, the Hurricanes win that trade in a landslide. It's a great trade in terms of value and a great trade in terms of impact. So, yeah, that's got to be in the number one spot easily.
Yeah, very easily. And then sticking with some guys that played key pieces in 06, in a trade with Florida back in 2002, they traded for Brett Hedican, Kevin Adams, Thomas Malik and a 2003 second round pick. They sent, I'm totally going to butcher the name here, so I may need your help. Sandis Oz-Lynch?
I think it's Ozil Lynch.
Oz-Lynch. Okay, thank you. Byron Ritchie. Again, they sent those guys down to Florida. Malik, he ended up being flipped for Martin Gerber, who was Cam Ward's backup there in the 06 Cup. And again, Hedican and Adams playing key parts in 06 in the Hurricanes hoisting that trophy. Adams now GM of the Buffalo Sabres as well.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it, like I said, some Brett Hedican, one of the better defensemen on that team of that Hurricanes era. Kevin Adams, one of those glue guys. And yeah, you mentioned Malik being flipped for Martin Gerber. Not only was he the backup to Cam Ward in the playoffs and made a couple key starts, I think he got a shutout in one of the wins against Buffalo in the Eastern Conference Final after they put him back in. But you forget too, he was the starter for that incredible regular season that set them up for that cup run. That that regular season, I believe, has been surpassed by the past two. But at the time, it was the best regular season in franchise history. Won the Southeast Division by a landslide. Got the number 2 seed in the Eastern Conference. So yeah, he played a big role in that as well. So yeah, this one was all Jared. This is not one that I would have thought of. But that definitely was a great trade for the Hurricanes.
Yeah, it is one that really played off. And then you talk to folks that watched that particular team, and everyone loves Brett Hedican as well. So anytime you can bring in a guy that your fans really latch on to, that's always a good thing as well. And another one, this was one you were excited to talk about as well. Back in 2015, when this trade happened, with the Chicago Blackhawks. Blackhawks sending over Teuvo Teravainen and Brian Bickle for a 2016 second rounder and 2017 third rounder. That is, before we started recording, you said that's probably one of, if not the best trade that Ron Francis made in his tenure. I really want to hear your thoughts on that one.
Yeah, I think that is that one's weaponized cap space at its finest. I think you look at the Blackhawks had given out some big contracts following their cup runs, including to Brian Bickle, who had been a really, really good postseason performer for them. But that one had become a bit of an albatross for them. They needed to clear it, and the cost of doing so was trading away a young ascending top 6 forward who ended up becoming even more than that with the Hurricanes for a pair of second-round picks, in exchange for the Hurricanes taking on Bickle's cap hit. And the thought, at the time was Bickle, even though he was overpaid, the Hurricanes didn't care about the salary cap at the time, so he could be a useful, gritty veteran, bottom 6 forward. Unfortunately, Bickle's career ended after that season because he was sadly diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. We all remember that heartwarming moment when he scored the shootout winner in his last NHL game. Still brings a tear to my eye when I see it. But then you look at Teuvo Teravainen. I mean, look at everything that he has done for the Hurricanes in his time here. Another key piece in their rise back to relevance. Had a couple down years the past couple years, but I mean, at his best, an elite playmaking top 6 winger, great chemistry with Sebastian Aho, really key in forming that top line. You look the 18-19 season in which the Hurricanes made it back to the playoffs was his best with the Hurricanes, 55 assists, 76 points. So, and he's been here now for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. So yeah, I mean, that you look at what the Hurricanes gave up, just a couple of picks for being willing to take on that Brian Bickle cap hit. Making a move like that is kind of a no-brainer if you have the ability to do it, but it doesn't make it any less of a great trade than that it was one that was easy to make because it has panned out so very, very well for the Hurricanes.
Yeah, and it's kind of one of those, looking back on it, who could have thought, Teravainen would have developed into such a vital part of the Hurricanes organization. Again, he was on the rise back then, but to have ascended the way he has, crazy stuff to think about. And being a key piece in the Hurricanes getting to a championship caliber level team. Without him, do they get to being Stanley Cup contenders? Who knows? But we will continue to dive into more Hurricanes trades right after this quick break, folks. Now we're talking about the role Teuvo Teravainen played in making the Hurricanes a championship caliber team. And for a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit, just like Teuvo Teravainen. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits just right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check mark to know the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available for U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Now, diving back into the Hurricanes trade, another one that really, from the early days of the franchise, one that really played an integral part in both of his stints with the Hurricanes is Justin Williams. They traded for him for Danny Markov to Philly back in the day, and he's obviously key part in that '06 Cup. That's where the legend of Mr. Game 7 began, and he obviously ended up leaving or getting traded, excuse me, to LA. Gosh, what was in the 2011, I believe it was, when he got traded to LA, and then obviously spent time with LA, winning 2 Stanley Cups there. Spent a year with the Washington Capitals, then came back and was a key piece in them getting to where they are now. Without his leadership and veteran guidance, who knows, where the Hurricanes are at there. And, we have, the 2019-2020 team picture over on our wall in our living room, and down on the first row where they have like the coaching staff and the captains, Justin Williams, he's sitting down there with the captains. He played a key piece in the later years of his career in his second stint of getting this team back to playoff contention.
Yeah, and I think Justin Williams probably doesn't come back and sign with the Hurricanes if he doesn't play for them in the first place. You look at everything he meant as the captain of that 18-19 team. Ended up sitting out most of the next year, but then playing down the stretch of the coming back, signing, playing down the stretch of the regular season in the playoffs. And obviously the role he played in the 2006 Stanley Cup Championship, obviously scored what's probably still the most iconic goal in franchise history, that empty netter on home ice to clinch the Stanley Cup. Just such a special moment. But yeah, I mean, you look at, we talk about Rod Brind'amour as one of the key figures in the Hurricanes' rise back to relevance in the past 5 years or so, especially for what he did that first year at the start of it. Justin Williams deserves to be mentioned right there too.
Yeah, and he's a guy that is 100% going to be in the Carolina Hurricanes Hall of Fame. It wouldn't surprise me if he's the next one whenever we end up, getting the announcement of who it will be this offseason. He is a really key piece in the Hurricanes' rise to prominence now. And like you said, probably the best goal in franchise history as well. Next up is one we won't spend a whole lot of time talking about because it's pretty self-explanatory when we just tell you what this 1-for-1 swap was. Victor Rask to the Minnesota Wild for Nino Niederreiter. I mean, that just says it all right there. Rask, he wasn't much there in Minnesota, and Nino, another key piece in the Hurricanes' rise back to prominence over the past few years. I know, a lot of folks, hated it when he left because he was such a key piece on this team and a fan favorite. He's a guy that really provided some scoring for the Hurricanes when guys like Sebastian Aho, Andrei Svechkov, when they were struggling to score. And he was a guy that could put the team on his back and get it done for him. And that Niederreiter, Stahl, and Fost line, oh man, that was a good freaking line.
Yeah, it really was last year. I mean, you look, Nino Niederreiter scored 24 goals for the Hurricanes last season. That is 4 more goals than Victor Rask scored as a member of the Minnesota Wild. I remember even thinking at the time, like, Rask was really struggling. Nino wasn't having the greatest season in Minnesota, but when the trade got made at the time, even, I was kind of like, really? Okay, like, that's a pretty good move. And then it ended up being spectacular value just with, the disparity in what the Hurricanes got from Niederreiter and what the Wild got from Rask. And yeah, I mean, Nino played a huge role in them getting back to the playoffs that year. Ended up playing on the top line with Teuvo Teravainen and Sebastian Aho in that regular season. The rest of that regular season with the Hurricanes, he had 14 goals and 30 points in 36 games. So, I mean, like, you look at that, because the thing people forget about that year is the Hurricanes came into the second half of the season close to the cellar of the NHL in 2018-19 and had to make a furious charge down the stretch just to get into the playoffs for the first time since 2009. They probably don't get into the playoffs. They almost certainly, I think, don't get into the playoffs. If you look at the production he had, the goals he scored, what he brought to that top line with Aho and Teravainen, if they don't make that move to bring in Nino Niederreiter.
Yeah, again, I really agree with you there. I don't think they make the playoffs there because they were second to last in the league. The team below them was the eventual Stanley Cup winners that year, the St. Louis Blues. And yeah, without Niederreiter, they don't make the playoffs there. And because he was insanely good for the Hurricanes. And yet that's, a guy I wouldn't necessarily mind them bringing back. We've talked about, guys, already, like Justin Williams, having multiple stints with the team. Niederreiter, if, they could get the right deal done, then okay. I know, gosh, what did he sign with Nashville? Is a 4-year, I think it was.
2 by 4.
2-year. Okay, so you have 1 year
he's
left.
Traded to Winnipeg at the deadline last year, so he'll have a year left with Winnipeg.
Yeah, and who knows what they're gonna do this year as well. But if the trade was right, that it's not a deal I would be opposed to because he knows the system and we know he can produce for the team. And sticking with the team up in Canada, talking about Niederreiter, the role he played in the Hurricanes getting back to prominence was when the Hurricanes traded for Dougie Hamilton with Calgary. They sent Elias Lindholm and Noah Hannafin up to Calgary for Dougie Hamilton, Michael Ferland, and Adam Fox. Ferland and Fox, obviously, they kind of knew early on those guys weren't going to stay. And Dougie Hamilton, he's kind of the key piece here for the Hurricanes. Like Niederreiter played a really big piece in the Hurricanes getting back to prominence. Before he broke his leg in Columbus in the the 2020-2021 season, I believe it was. He was having like a Norris caliber season that year, and then things got cut short because of his leg. And he was a guy that the Hurricanes fans they really wanted them to keep him. Excuse me. And because he was so stinking good there on that top pairing with Jacob Slavin. And for a little bit, the Hurricanes, had trouble replacing him. Kind of bouncing around, with some guys. They had Tony D'Angelo there. They also had, oh God, who else did they have on that top pairing with Jacob Slavin that year after? I don't remember. They were kind of moving some guys around.
Ethan Bear, right?
Ethan Bear. Okay, that's who it was.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember. And now, they seem to have, found, at least in the medium term, replacing, with Brent Burns. But yeah, that, he's another guy, without him, who knows where the Hurricanes are at now.
Yeah, I think, you look at, that kind of infused some star power into the Hurricanes with Dougie Hamilton, being one of the best offensive defensemen, top pairing right shot blue liners in the league. And I think that was an important trade because like this wasn't a fleecing. Like you said,
No.
Ferland was only here for a year. Fox didn't stay. And Elias Lindholm has turned into a really, 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 really good player for the Calgary Flames. But I think it was an important trade because Dougie Hamilton, again, you look at those first 3 years, especially that first one, the role he played again in the Hurricanes, getting back to the playoffs, making that rise to relevance. But looking at it too, that was the first off season of Tom Dundon as owner, Dom Waddell as general manager, Rod Brind'amour as head coach. And it was, I think, in the past, because Lindholm and Hannafin were RFAs, the Hurricanes were trying to get something done with them. And in the past regimes, the Hurricanes would have been like, oh, these are good guys, you good young guys. We like our group. Just would have brought them back, not made a ton of changes. Hurricanes were having trouble in, contract negotiations with them and kind of said, well, these guys were part of the status quo that wasn't good enough. We're going to shake it up. We're not going to just do the same thing over and over. We're going to do something different. And they made, a huge trade, brought in Dougie Hamilton, traded those guys away. And I think that trade, in addition to what it did in terms of just bringing in a player the caliber of Dougie Hamilton, signaled that things were going to be different under this new regime, that what had happened in the past, the status quo, was not good enough, and that they were going to do everything they could to make changes to make the Hurricanes better.
Yeah, I agree. And, again, Lindholm, he has really blossomed into a great player for the Flames. We've talked about already of the Hurricanes potentially trying to bring him back in a trade. Noah Hannafin, he's been good as well. Not great, but, he's been solid. So it worked out for the Flames as well. It wasn't, again, a total fleecing like, with the Niederreiter and Rask trade. That was one worked out for both sides. And, we do have some more trades that we want to talk about as well. And we will do that right after this quick break, folks. All right, folks, we're back and it's time to continue diving into these trades. And this was one that has, we'll still can see over time, but I'm willing to to go ahead and put it on here. And that was when the Carolina Hurricanes traded for Patrick Marleau, almost immediately bought him out in 2000 for a 2020 first round pick, which ended up being 13th overall and they drafted Seth Jarvis. 2020 7th round pick, 199th overall for Alexander Pashin, and a 2020 6th round pick, 177th overall for Axel Rendell. Jarvis, he has blossomed into a really, really good player for the Hurricanes, and that in and of itself makes the trade for basically in terms of buyout worth it. And Pashin, another guy that the Hurricanes do have high hopes for. He could be a guy that they could easily, throw in a package trade. But they don't want to because of the high hopes they have for him down the road. And Don Waddell did say, I forget what year it was. It may have been that season, like after they bought him out, that they did try to get something done with Patrick Marleau, to get him to play. Obviously they would, if you're going to trade for the guy, you might as well try. And then obviously, things, didn't shake out with that, so they just spot him out. But yeah, this has, really, this was a trade that set them up really stinking well for the future.
Well, it's another example, I think, of the Hurricanes weaponizing cap space that they had available at the time. Patrick Marleau, I think, had like a $6.25 million cap hit that the Leafs needed to get rid of. So the Hurricanes get that first round pick for that. And yeah, at the time, I think that even after the trade, they said, like, we're going to try to get him to play, because at the time he still could have been a useful, veteran bottom six winger, provide some secondary scoring. He didn't want to play for the Hurricanes, so they just bought him out. And that's always the funniest thing to, like, the Dundon is cheap argument to me, is like, he literally paid $6 million for a first round draft pick. Like, if you think back to that. And the Hurricanes got a little bit lucky with that pick from Toronto ending up being as high as it was, 13th overall, because of the way that the things worked out with the 2020 playoff bubble with the play-in round, which I think the Leafs lost their play-in series to the Columbus Blue Jackets. So that pick ended up being in like the non-playoff team tier of picks, so a little bit higher than it would have been. And yeah, then the Hurricanes get Seth Jarvis, a guy who's had a really nice first 2 years in the league. I think stepped up really nicely in some of the playoff games this past run. And, a guy that they have high hopes for developing into a, really, really good top six forward. And he's mostly played in the top six in his career, which means that he's given the Hurricanes a top six winger on an entry-level contract, which is very valuable to a team that spends to the cap. So yeah, I think that was a very, very shrewd move on the part of the Hurricanes.
Yeah, I agree. And it's one that, we're obviously, super excited to see how it pans out down the road. Now we're going to have a bit of rapid fire trades here. Some trades that, Andrew added in down here as honorable mentions, and take it away, Andrew, because I'm really ready to hear your thoughts on these.
I won't spend a ton. Well, okay. So the first one, actually, I will. I forgot I'd added this at the 2020 trade deadline, when the Hurricanes brought in Vincent Trocheck from Florida for Chase Priskie, Eetu Luostarinen, Eric Haula, and Lucas Wallmark. Haula was on an expiring contract. Things had kind of soured with him and the Hurricanes. Wallmark had been a nice young bottom six center for the Hurricanes, ended up not getting qualified by Florida. Luostarinen is still with Florida. He's been a nice piece for them, played for them in that run to the Stanley Cup. But Trocheck, for 2 and change years for the Hurricanes, gave them a really, really nice second line center, a good 1-2 punch with Aho. I think played a big role in them moving even further up the rung from just being like a wild card team to a top end of the league team, division champion. With him, solidified that forward lineup. And really, at the end, you look at, they really didn't end up giving up much for him. I mean, Wallmark is out of the league. Haula has been passed around like something I probably shouldn't say on this podcast since being in Florida. I don't know what happened to Priskie, but, obviously Trocheck's with the Rangers now, but was really good for the Hurricanes. And I remember when that trade happening thinking like, because I knew of Trocheck because he wasn't that far removed from a really nice year for Florida. I was like, wait, they got that Vincent Trocheck? They got that? Like, probably the best example of just an absolute out of left field trade the Hurricanes had made, because at the time they were missing Dougie Hamilton and Brett Pesce. So the thought was they'd add a defenseman, which they did. I mean, that trade deadline was awesome. They added Trocheck, they added Brady Shea, they added Sami Vatanen, who, did do a whole lot, but that's okay. But yeah, I mean, I just remember being floored that they actually got him. And then obviously, after a bit of an adjustment period that year, going into that next shortened COVID season when he had an awesome season for the Hurricanes, the returns on that one were really good.
Yes, it was.
You want me to keep going?
Yeah, you can keep going with your rapid fire stuff here.
All right. We got the one I talked about last week. I won't spend a ton of time on. Philip Paradis for Jiri Tlusty. Philip Paradis, one of the worst Hurricanes first-round picks of all time, never played in the NHL, but they ended up flipping him for Jiri Tlusty from the Maple Leafs. who ended up having a nice little run as a middle six winger for the Hurricanes, especially in that bizarre lockout season when he scored at a 40-goal pace. The Ponikarovsky for the 4th-round pick that became Jacob Slavin. I have this honorable mention just because, like, I feel like it's again worth noting what they ended up, how they ended up getting that pick. But I'm not sure I love the idea of grading trades based on, especially like that one, like a UFA for a mid-round pick, what the pick turns into. Like that, there's a little bit of luck involved with that.
Yeah.
Andrew Ladd for Tuomo Ruutu in 2008. Obviously, Ruutu, very fan favorite Finnish power forward. My brother's all-time favorite player for the Hurricanes. Had some really nice years for them. Played a big role in that 2009 run to the Eastern Conference Final, as did Jussi Jokinen, who the Hurricanes acquired shortly before the 2009 trade deadline for Wade Brookbank, Joseph Melichar, and a 4th-round pick. Obviously, we all know what UC did in that 2009 playoff run. Scored some huge goals, scored the buzzer beater goal in Game 4 against the Devils, scored the game-tying goal late in regulation in Game 7 against the Devils, scored, I think, an overtime winner in one of the games against the Bruins that series the Hurricanes won. And then, looking at his career going forward, I think the next year he scored 30 goals for the Hurricanes. He was with them for like 3 or 4 more years. Really good, versatile, top 6 forward, played some center, played on the wing, played a lot with Jeff Skinner his rookie year, gave us the famed Skins and Fins line with Skinner, Jokinen, and Ruutu. That was a lot of fun to watch.
Mm-hmm.
Probably played a big role in my Twitter handle being what it was somewhat around that time. So, yeah, I think Ruutu and Jokinen are definitely 2 of the better trades that Jim Rutherford made as Hurricanes general manager that you have to look at.
Yeah, I agree, with all of those for sure. And, the Trocheck trade, again, that was one that it was one of those, like, we got who? And then, like you said, also getting Brady Shea that year as well in the trade with the Rangers. Crazy
You could
stuff.
honestly throw Brady Shea into the honorable mentions as well.
Yeah, you could. They sent it was like
a first round pick.
But
pick. It was there because it was when they had Toronto's pick and their own pick. So it was like the lower of the 2 first-round picks. So the Hurricanes sent their first-rounder for Brady Shea and ended up keeping the Leafs first-round pick that, as we just talked about, became Seth Jarvis. So, yeah, I'd have that in honorable mention as well.
Yeah, I know, because that was another one that has panned out really stinking well for the Hurricanes. And it's nice, to see, just how many good trades that they have made over the course of their franchise history. Obviously, we stuck to, just Hurricane stuff. We didn't do any Whaler stuff because, neither of us were alive there. It can be a little hard to judge that stuff. But also, this is Locked On Hurricanes, not Locked On Whalers.
Well, and we just had the Hurricanes' 25th anniversary season. Like, when we talk about history, the Hurricanes have enough of their own history now that's really all we need to talk about here.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I agree there. But if there's any other trades that stick out to you, whether they were super old school as the Whalers, let us know at LO_Hurricanes on Twitter, myself on Twitter at Jared Ellis _96, Andrew on Twitter at ASchnitt53, and comment on YouTube. Again, whether it was a trade they made as the Whalers or another one we just didn't talk about today that you really like, let us know. And as always, folks, let's go Canes.